course, very modern apes. Today we're going to be finishing the Genesis Apologetics series, and we're finishing it much in the same way we started it, over a year ago. I have a cup of tea in hand, I've got a zit on my face that my, of course, haters can poke fun at, since they never feel like poking fun at the arguments that I'm making, and it's a dreary day outside, much like it was when this all began. Today we're talking about Genesis Apologetics and their claim that humans and dinosaurs once lived at the same time, approximately 6,000 years ago, but indeed also after the massive supernatural global flood that killed everything on the planet. And I suspect, although I don't know this because I haven't seen this video yet, I'm just eager to punt Genesis Apologetics from my line of sight, and I thought, when better to do it than when I'm in a really great mood like right now. So we're going to go ahead and just knock it out with absolutely no preparation beforehand. It's going to be very fun. But Genesis Apologetics is going to do so, I suspect, by proposing things like vague cave art, maybe some appeals to lake monsters, or the Mokele Mbembe, the one that lives in the Congo. Where actually I have a colleague right now. I should ask if she's seen it. And this is going to be a tour de force because I love talking about the dinosaur claims. It is so unbelievably unsubstantiated in every shape, form, and fashion, other than, of course, the avian dinosaurs, birds that we now occupy the planet with. And it may come as a shock to those of you who don't live in the United States that, this is a pretty common one from the evangelicals around here, the evangelical Christians. So much so that we still get new videos coming out about dinosaurs and humans living together. Usually there's some kind of hyperbolic adjective like irrefutable or unbelievably true or something like that. So I'm going to go into minimize mode and we're going to let Biddle and the boys, Dan Biddle and the boys, regale us with this supremely convincing evidence that humans and dinosaurs, the theropod and sauropod kinds, lived together. So here we are in mini mode, and we're getting ready to enjoy the seventh myth, the dinosaurs and the Bible. I'm probably going to be hopping tabs to investigate certain claims that Genesis Apologetics makes, as I tend to do. And you'll notice that I'm in incognito mode, and that's because I really don't like when Genesis Apologetics shows up on my instant queue when I'm hanging out on regular YouTube. I don't like seeing their stuff. I don't like it clogging up my line of sight, like I said earlier. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. You'll remember our lovely narrator. He's got a high-pitched nasally voice, much like mine. I find it to be quite charming, of course, as I'm sure you will as well. So we'll pause when we deem it necessary in this 20-minute and 36-second video. Don't you love that they always have so much to say about dinosaurs? Because dinosaurs are cool, they couldn't care less when they're trying to present geologic evidence for their global flood. But ooh boy, these guys can run their mouths about some dinosaurs. Let's do it.
Myth number 7 is dinosaurs died out millions of years ago, did not walk with man, and are not mentioned in the Bible. Many people have asked, where did dinosaurs fit into the biblical timeline?
Before we get into where they fit in the biblical timeline, I don't think too many people I know care if the dinosaurs are or are not mentioned in the Bible, but for the record, they're not. This has been, and we're going to get into this, the hermeneutics behind the behemoth or the behemoth. We're going to go with Behemoth and the Leviathan and what they think that these critters are. Usually it's Behemoth is a sauropod, Leviathan is like a mosasaur, even though it breathes fire. But we're going to get to that later because there are some really interesting ancient Near East conventional science stuff to look at. There is a bunch of conventional ancient Near East science stuff to look at with regard to it. So let's go.
And what does the Bible say about dinosaurs? Yes, the Bible does mention dinosaurs, even specifically. But before we get there, let's take a quick look at the big picture. Evolution holds that dinosaurs evolved 220 million years ago.
Remember, there's only two worldviews, young Earth creationism and evolution. There's only two genders, to young Earth creationism and evolution.
And died about 65 million years ago from any of a number of possible extinction events. But
Okay. The Alvarez hypothesis and the extraterrestrial impact theory, that's the same thing. We are off to a superb start. But these are the same thing. The Alvarez hypothesis is the extraterrestrial impact theory. These are talking about the same thing. Alvarez I can't spell hypothesis. Just so you can see what I mean. The Alvarez hypothesis posits the mass extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs and many other living things during the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event was caused by the impact of a large asteroid on the Earth, otherwise known as an extraterrestrial impact. So, top brass right from the start. I love it. They also have volcanism and plate tectonics.
The Bible teaches that all land animals, including dinosaurs, were created on the sixth day of creation, just thousands of years ago, and they were all named by Adam just before God handed over his completed creation to Adam and Eve, charging them to take dominion over his completed creation. Then, about 4,400 years ago, the entire world was deluged by Noah's flood, and the dinosaurs, along with billions of other creatures, were wiped out. Let's take a quick look at some evidences that show that the biblical account might actually be true. First, dinosaurs are cleverly designed. Consider the
credit where credit is due, might actually be true. I do like that.
Consider this Triceratops. Its 2,000-pound head is mounted in a way that allows it to turn every which way, yet still be strong enough to ram something, even while running. What about massive sauropods with weight-bearing
Massive sauropods. Good job. Top brass, always.
Systems from hip to toe that allow its 200,000-pound body to even walk, and neck vertebrae that are 90% filled with air so it can lift up its head. Next, there's the absence of dinosaur ancestors and transitions.
Before we touch on that little nugget right there, we have to appreciate that the first argument was, boy, it sure looks like organisms are well suited to their respective niches and have abilities that correspond to their biomechanics. I don't think that that's anything shy of just pointing out that, boy, it sure looks like the organisms that are surviving are quite fit. How curious. You could do this for anything. You could point to Anomalocaris, this shrimp-looking critter from the Cambrian, and be like, wow, look how well designed it is. Look at how it is capable of swimming around. You could do the same thing for, like, tube worms or Priapolita or bacteria, for that matter. It is a non-argument, particularly since pretty much every time that creationists do this, you can go to whatever it is that they're talking about and reduce it to kind of the sum of its parts, come to find out essentially that going back to like the first tetrapod, not that much is changing in between organisms. Bones get longer, bones get shorter. The overall architecture might change, but nothing novel really has to be quote unquote created to get something like a Tiktaalik, right, to something like a member of Ceratopsia, right? I mean, yes, changes are occurring, and yes, you have hundreds of millions of years to get those changes. So it's not really all that complicated. With the proper pressures, certain mutations do get selected for, and they become fixed in the population, and evolution occurs. We see this today. So, but this is a good one right here. I quite like this. Let's just do a cursory Google search, because as you can see here, they've labeled this dinosaur family tree seemingly looks like on their own. They've got gray equaling theoretical transitions. So I'm not sure when this chart was made, but we understood dinosaur evolution pretty dang well. And I would leave that up to someone like Dapper Dinosaur to get involved in the nitty-gritty. But you can just Google dinosaur evolution, and it turns out that you get some pretty nice graphics that link to some pretty nice papers. Like, for instance, this one here. I like the look of this. Let me make sure you guys can actually see that. Yeah, you guys can see that pretty well. Rapid evolution of body size enhanced dinosaur and bird survival. So we again see numerous different organisms emerging in the Triassic, but the curious thing is, notice how similar all of them look. They don't really start to diversify in body form and morphology until the Jurassic. And the reason for this is because dinosaurs evolved to fill the millions of open niches over the course of the Triassic, of course, left by the members of the Permian when 95% of all life went extinct in the Great Dying. So all of a sudden you had all of these synapsids occupying all these different niches, and they're just wiped out by the Permian. The Siberian traps just detonate on the Russian countryside, and everything goes to hell in a handbasket. And because of that, the survivors remained like pretty unimpressive. And this is a well-known phenomenon following mass extinctions. Every mass extinction that we see in the history of life on our planet, after you have an extinction event, everything looks pretty boring, right? The Triassic is known for this in particular. I mean, you get these cool-looking pseudo-Suchians and things like that near the end, but for the most part, at the beginning of the Triassic, just like, you know, at the beginning of the Carboniferous and at the beginning of the Cenozoic, as a bigger group of periods, things are pretty unremarkable until they have time to actually spread out and diversify. This is why, like, Lystrosaurus, after the Permian mass extinction, occupies most of our fossil record. Because they're the only critters that really made it through. There was just, you had to be a very particular type of animal to make it through that kind of mass extinction. And then life was just tough for a long period of time after that. So you'll notice that all of these named organisms that pop up in the Triassic are pretty similar. They're lizard-looking critters with 4 legs and a long tail, and sometimes they run on 2 legs and sometimes they run on 4. But they don't really start looking strange really until the Cretaceous, and they start to in the Jurassic. So this is a bonkers silly claim right here. Yellow, real fossil data. Gray, theoretical transitions. So I don't really know where they're getting this from, but let's let them continue, and we'll do some digging in a moment.
Even the Chicago Field Museum sign admits there have been 0 transitions between dinosaur kinds. It shows question.
Notice that this is in 2007 down here, the Chicago Field Museum in 2007. Boy, that was over a decade ago. I wonder how dinosaur paleontology has advanced since then, given the general sentiment that we find a new dinosaur fossil species every single week. And that really is the number that they throw around. New dinosaur every week. Oops, I should have done this. More dinosaur fossils are being found now than ever before. Let's see if we can find actually what I was looking for. We probably won't because I'm looking for it. I've heard that as a sentiment. Someone in the... Yeah, here we go. Hunters are uncovering almost a new species every week. So, vindication, awesome. But yeah, the Chicago Field Museum sign from 2007. Boy, that sure does act as the authority on this, doesn't it, Genesis Apologetics? That would be like going, oh, I don't know, 14 years prior to the discovery of the atomic bomb and being like, well, I mean, it's not like we're making that much progress. Look at all the gaps in our understanding of making nuclear weapons. You're a little out of date there, friend.
Marks regarding where they came from. It's almost like someone just put each basic kind on Earth right at the same time. There are even dinosaur design features that show they lived in the ideal pre-flood world. Pterodactyls may have been too heavy to fly in today's atmosphere. Same with huge pre-flood dragonflies.
The griffin flies are from the Carboniferous. Like, these guys are not zooming about during the Mesozoic. What are you even saying? Like, his sentiment here is that the pre-flood world was perfect, but I think that kind of holds for other organisms as well, right? So, like, if the atmosphere was conducive for dragonfly flight, which is markedly different from pterodon flight, well, don't you have to have 2 different, like, ideal conditions? Which means they couldn't have been occurring contemporaneously, since this is an atmospheric condition, right? It's pretty consistent globally. I think it's kind of a bad argument, but I mean, he also just asserted that there were distinct dinosaur kinds, and like they can't even tell us what those kinds are. Like you can't, to my knowledge, outside of the EIG mammal kinds, you can't find the delineation of kinds. They won't dare draw lines in the fossil record, because the fossil record is subject to change when we find new specimens and connect new dots. So they can't draw those lines lest they put themselves at risk of those lines being crossed.
The fossil record is filled with giant creatures and plants. We know this because there are billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. And when
Big ol' pause there. Billions of dead things? Yes. Buried in rock? Yes. Laid down by water? Not so much. The fossil conditions, the conditions rather for fossilization, they are quite favorable when water is present, but that is not the only way to get a fossil. And in fact, some of our most famous fossils that we know of weren't formed in water. The fossils from the La Brea tar pits, for example, those aren't waterborne fossils. Neither are the ones from, I think they call them Lagerstraten, these eutrophic lakes where organisms have to fall into the water. It's not burial by water, though. They fall into the water. The conditions of the waters are highly eutrophic. They sink to the bottom, and the anaerobic conditions allow them to preserve. So from tar pits to Lagerstraten to burial by, for instance, mudslides, landslides, volcanic eruptions, volcanism, ash, things like what happened at Pompeii, which, knowing flood basalts, this happened all throughout the history of life on Earth. Water is not the only way, rapid burial by water, I should say, is not the only way that you get a fossil.
we look at the dinosaur fossil record, we see that they were buried furiously, rapidly, and simultaneously, oftentimes found fleeing in groups.
This is not correct. They are not found fleeing in groups, and most dinosaur graveyards, as I covered in my Dinosaur National Monument bite-sized bust, are in locations that are like ephemeral lakes. They're locations where they experience seasonal flooding, right? So, and the way that we know this is because we find traces on the fossils themselves. There will be differences in the weathering on the fossil portions that were buried immediately versus the top of the fossil, the part of the organism that was exposed to the air, because these things weren't being covered by miles and miles and miles of sediment. They were being washed down rivers, which is why, boy, isn't it curious that they picked this particular portion of the United States. There's a little thing called the, let's see, what's it called? The Atlantic Seaway? Cretaceous. I spelled it wrong, badly, because I can't type. Western Interior Seaway, I always forget the name of it. How can, boy, look at this nice map here. Look at this nice map here of our good old Western Interior Seaway. Look at where it's crossing. And then look at where they're pulling these dinosaurs buried in water from. It's almost like they're buried in water because there was a massive sea right there. The Western Interior Seaway. It's interesting, and you know, of course, in these seaways, you've got a lot of dumping in the seaway from river systems, deltas, and things of that nature, that are, being river systems, also conducive to rapid burial by water. How come we're not finding this in, like, the Grand Canyon? How come we find traces of desert dunes and gentle feeding there in these fossil beds that are located in areas like that? So, no, I do like this. A herd of dinosaurs died in a flood or some other catastrophe. Massive flood events may have killed thousands of dinosaurs at one time. Flood events. This one, of course, keep in mind, none of these are being none of these sources are being cited anywhere. 10,000 dinosaurs buried by a catastrophic inundation. Dinosaurs, fish, and clams buried in 100-yard wide flood deposit. Wow, that's pretty big. Giant trees stripped and quickly buried by ancient flood. Hundreds of dinosaurs died and were buried by flash floods. Boy, these seem kind of inconsistent with one another, don't they? Almost like they were distinct events.
Take this massive bone bed in Hilda, Canada. Thousands of centrosaurs were catastrophically buried over an entire square mile. Or this one in China, where thousands of different kinds of dinosaurs were simultaneously buried in a single 980-foot long ravine.
So, let's look at both of these independently. I think that would be good. So what's this first one? We got one in Canada. I'll probably just pause it here so that we can check it out. So I found some fun stuff. Let's look at these two bone beds together. Now, I typically try not to endorse just Wikipedia hacking, but when you don't know anything about a subject, it's usually good to at least eyeball the Wikipedia, because they'll cite what they're saying, and then you can go and track down those original sources, and they give you a nice jumping off point if you don't know the literature base around what it is you're trying to learn about. So let's talk about the formation of the Hilda mega bone bed, the one that was just being discussed. So the research on the Centrosaur bone beds is generally considered to be a herd of dinosaurs drowning while trying to cross a swollen river. And this was done by Eberth and Brinkman, and Barkus proposed something that was slightly different. He thinks that they were killed by a flood. Now, ask yourself whether or not this is a global or a local flood. I'll give you a hint, it wasn't a global flood, but we're going to get into that a little bit a little bit later. So they discussed this, precisely what I was just mentioning, and again, I did not prepare for this, so this is just happy happenstance, discussing the region around the Western Interior Seaway, which is what I was just saying, prone to tropical storm activity, many of which would become full-scale hurricanes. Similar weather events occur today in the Gulf of Mexico and Bangladesh. Bangladesh is going to come up in a minute, too. These floods would have been large enough to submerge coastal lowland plains that the dinosaurs were living on, leaving nowhere else to escape or hide to. Again, this is not speculation. We see this again in places like the Gulf of Mexico and in Bangladesh. Now, this is the part that I really like. Right down here. Let me make sure that you can see it. After being deposited in their final resting places, the carcasses were torn apart and had their bones trampled and chewed by scavengers. These processes left the abrasion and tooth marks seen on the bones preserved at the Hilda mega bone bed. Chemical reactions between decaying dinosaur flesh and floodwaters caused iron to precipitate out of the water and form ironstone concretions commonly found in the mud rock hosting the mega bone bed. So, how do you suppose that these scavengers are managing to nibble away consistently, and that bacteria is able to do its thing, typically aerobic bacteria like the ones mentioned here, if they're buried under miles and miles of sediment instantly? How is that supposed to occur? This is why they don't go into the bone beds that they cite. Their eventful taphonomies suggested that the Centrosaur carcasses were permanently buried by a later flood, rather than the one that drowned them. Of course, because the scavengers were picking at the carcasses. These floods may have actually been common enough to be the primary means by which sediment was deposited in the Hilda area during the Cretaceous. Erbeth, Brinkman, and Barkus observed evidence that the sediment was deformed and contorted near the top and bottom before it hardened into the mudstone that it is today. So, like I said, really good jumping off point. So I went to the source that they have here. Unfortunately, it's a book, but I still went there and I found the bit that they were discussing it. They go over the data a little bit more specifically, but for our purposes, I'm just going to touch on this right here. Given the data and interpretations presented here, a likely scenario as to how the Rattlesnake Mountain bone beds formed is as follows. Death of Ceratopsian Ameriscalensis and nearby Hadrosaur hatchlings, scavenging and scattering of Ceratopsian carcass and nearby Hadrosaur hatchlings by young Tyrannosaurids and small theropods, severe flood events that washed over the floodplain, sweeping the remains and the theropods to nesting sites into a channel of a nearby river, the mixing of elements into a slurry of sand, mud, snails, and small plant fragments, deposition of the slurry as a channel lag, subsequent deposition of the overlying finer sands during the final receding flood stage. Eberth and Curry proposed that the overriding formative and preservation influences on the rich fossil deposits at Dinosaur Provincial Park were frequent and severe floods across the coastal plain. They envisioned Bangladesh-style flooding, and again, we're going to see Bangladesh a third time here in a moment, for the region. Secondarily, they cited predation, scavenging, and trampling as important factors that modified the carcasses and bones of vertebrates as they were about to enter the fossil record. This sort of flooding and post-mortem events are broadly similar to the scenario I envision for Rattlesnake Mountain bone beds. So this is actually discussing a different bone bed, and then they mentioned the ones at Dinosaur Provincial Park, Eberth and Curry's. It couldn't be a global flood because of the scavenging. That completely moves that out of the realm of possibility, okay? So this one doesn't work. What about the other one? What about this one? This is, I just clicked the first link that I could find on it, because a lot of the primary literature is, I can't speak the language for, but I really like this. The fossils here at the, make sure, Zhuchang, the Zhuchang area, right, in this big ravine. The fossils here, more than 15,000 fractured, mangled, and blackened bones from about 65 million years ago in the late Cretaceous period, right before they went extinct. So here's something that's fun. Floods can't blacken bones. So yet again, we have a bone bed that could not possibly be the result of a global flood event, right? The much more likely explanation is, again, local flooding that periodically happens in a location. This is particularly interesting that they were blackened around 65 million years ago, because it is thought by many paleontologists that a portion of the dinosaurs' extinction goes to the Deccan traps, which is basically the entire subcontinent of India was on fire at the end of the Cretaceous thanks to flood basalts. Very similar to the Siberian traps that we saw at the end of the Permian. We're talking about levels of volcanism here that we have never witnessed as humans. And as in our entire tenure on this planet, about 300,000 years, we haven't seen this kind of volcanism pretty much since it happened, the Deccan traps on the subcontinent of India. Prior to that, the biggest ones were, actually still the biggest ones are the Siberian traps of the Permian. But we're talking 2 miles deep of lava in some areas. It's a lot of burning. So it's not surprising that we're finding very close by in China, I mean close by relatively speaking, some of the continued consequences of this mass volcanism. Alternatively, it could be the result of the just rampant wildfires that pockmarked the Earth after the Chicxulub impact event happened. We would have seen massively hot temperatures. Essentially, the whole surface of the planet would have been about the temperature of your oven on broil for about 20 minutes after the impact event occurred and spread its way around the surface of the planet. At least that's what they're currently saying, those current estimates. Rampant wildfires, charred bones, it all makes sense. One piece is missing. Where does the global flood fit in? It doesn't. So let's let our boy continue on here. Now that we have appropriately shown that neither of these bone beds could lend themselves to a global flood.
There are hundreds of dinosaur bone beds all over the world, including the U.S., where the Morrison Formation covers 13 states and 700,000 square miles.
Dinosaur National Monument, right here. I did a whole video on this. Guess what it couldn't be? If you guessed a global flood, you're right, because again, they're scavenging.
Thousands of torn-apart dinosaurs are buried here in hundreds of mass graves, with many found in the classic death pose with their necks arched back, choking as they died. Museum signs everywhere even admit they died in a watery catastrophe.
Now wait a minute. Does the flood disarticulate everything? Or does it bury them in their death pose? If it's this horrifically rampant flood that absolutely rips organisms to pieces, we should expect them all to be disarticulated. I don't think there's any condition that we could expect them to be, I guess, insta-buried in their death pose, but even supposing there was, we definitely shouldn't get both, right? It should be one or the other. The conditions being a global flood should be globally standardized, should they not?
Some dinosaurs are even found mummified, with tree leaves, flowers, ferns, shrubs, and algae still in their stomach. Dinosaurs are even found buried with marine creatures. Isn't a global flood the best explanation for this?
No.
Scientists have been discovering soft tissue in dinosaur bones. They describe blood cells, blood vessels, connective tissue, and even collagen, which...
So, those blood vessels and that fresh-looking stretchy tissue rather, the stretchy tissue has been chemically treated. That's why it's behaving in such an elastic fashion. Other classics that they're bringing up are going to be notoriously robust organic compounds, so things like bone proteins, collagen, keratin, things like that, stuff that's the toughest stuff on the body. In mammals, this is typically going to be like your enamel. This is why, like, quite often when we're trying to pull DNA from ancient hominins, or Neanderthals, or Denisovans, or hopefully someday Homo erectus and Heidelbergensis, etc., you're going to go for the teeth. Right, that enamel is hopefully keeping everything still in a nice little pocket. But what you're not going to find is going to be things like DNA, right? You're not going to get any DNA from these dinosaurs. That has not been confirmed. We'll see if they go ahead and suppose that it is the case, but Fuzz Rana, an old Earth creationist, actually has an excellent book, Dinosaur Soft Tissue in the Age of the Earth, in which he goes over the fact that, like, unilaterally, the types of organic tissues, if you want to call it that, I think that's pretty generous, the organic substances that we're finding are all the most robust types, and they're usually like cross-linked and stored away in matrices, ways that they can be not broken down.
Which has a maximum shelf life of about 900,000 years at 40 degrees. With a maximum shelf life of less than 1 million years, what's collagen doing in dinosaur bones that are supposedly 65 million years old?
Supposedly. Thank you, Biddle and the boys. Well, I'm glad you asked. Allow me to elucidate the situation. So I whipped out our good friend Fuzz Rana's book. This is Dinosaur Blood in the Age of the Earth. You can buy it on Amazon. You should. It's quite good. And Fuzz is indeed quite qualified to write a text like this because he has a PhD in chemistry with an emphasis on biochem. So he really knows what he's talking about. And he's got a lot on what Dan Biddle and the boys were just talking about. So first, discussing the structure of collagen. So collagen is a fibrous protein biomolecule, rather. It has a triple helix as its kind of base structural unit that consists of 3 long extended protein chains that wrap around each other. And then these guys twist together to create collagen fibrils, which twist together to create collagen fibers, as you can see in this diagram here. Fuzz says of the collagen, he says this property, that being the intertwining of protein chains and fibrils along extensive cross-linking between the collagen chains, which makes it incredibly durable, it makes it well suited for connective tissues in animals as well as for preservation. So one thing that he notes here is that the collagen fibers have a lot of contact points. So because of these contact points, it's very difficult to degrade when compared to other kind of less knit together biomolecules. Even if individual protein strands break down, the fiber remains largely intact because of these association points. Once the protein strand breaks, the fragments are held in close proximity by these contact points. This forced closeness allows for broken strands to occasionally rejoin and reform the original protein. If the broken strands were not held juxtaposed to each other, the fragments would diffuse away from one another, thus preventing the reversal of the degradation process. So not only is it hard to degrade, but if it isn't entirely degraded, it can actually reform bonds, which makes it incredibly durable and difficult to get rid of, to purge from samples, even over long periods of time. But that hard date that Dan Biddle and the boys give us, that 900,000 years, what about that? Well, I'm glad you asked, because Fuzz covers that as well. He notes that he actually has 700,000 years, and it's cited by Brian Thomas for 700 years. 700,000 years is for 1% of collagen to remain. And again, Brian Thomas, creationist, probably who these guys are getting their 900,000 year number for all of it, not just the 1%. But Fuzz notes that these guys are essentially basing their research on some work done by University of Manchester in the UK, which measured collagen loss in cattle and human bones at very high temperatures. And what Fuzz essentially has to say is that it's not particularly relevant for application to things like dinosaur bones, which is why no normal paleontologist has done this. This is why Schweitzer and co. haven't done this. He, for instance, has to say, one has to wonder if the kinetic data for collagen breakdown in bones near the boiling point of water, again, high temperatures, is what these guys at Manchester were doing, and that's who Brian Thomas and Dan Biddle are cribbing from, is relevant to the breakdown for the rate of temperatures that would be under 100 degrees Fahrenheit, let alone temperatures near 50 degrees Fahrenheit. It is quite possible that at high temperatures the collagen would undergo structural changes, for example, breaking those interchain hydrogen bonds that cross-link collagen chains together that would make it much more susceptible to chemical degradation than at lower temperatures where collagen will remain in its native state. In other words, the conditions employed by the research team at University of Manchester may not be relevant to Schweitzer and other paleontologist discoveries, and thus it is not relevant to Brian Thomas's discovery, or work, if you can call it that, and makes Biddle's claim here dumb and not relevant, I suppose I would repeat myself and say. He also says another reason why the results obtained by the Manchester team don't contradict the recovery of collagen from 70 to 80 million year old dinosaur fossils relates to the question that they essentially asked these guys at University of Manchester, because they were looking at how long collagen can remain in animals in a form that can be isolated and used as a source of genetic information about the organisms found at these archaeological and fossil sites. So the team wasn't trying to find out how long the chemical and physically altered collagen fragments can persist. They were trying to find out how long it can persist in a useful form that you can pull a yield from, right? So yet again, the creationists are using data that does not apply and attempting to draw conclusions from it. This is why they rarely make good scientists, because they already have their conclusion in mind. So collagen, not a problem. By the way, Fuss goes through some other biomolecules in this text and similarly assesses them in the way that we've done to collagen. So let's see if we hear any of these other ones, and we'll know, and you'll know, that we won't have to go over it every time. You'll just know the answers in here, and you can buy it for yourself. So they cover collagen, he covers keratin, he covers chitin, he covers eumelanin, he covers heme, quinones, and blood vessels. Ooh, that's a good one. We already saw that one. Just in case, let's read the blood vessel part, because I think it's quite fun. Blood vessels, these extremely durable materials are made of endothelial cells that organize into a channel. An elastin matrix, basement membrane, muscle fibers, and collagen matrix respectively surround this channel. The design makes it possible for blood vessels to endure high pressures that result when blood is pumped throughout the body. Given how durable blood vessels must be, it is reasonable to think that they would be highly resistant to breakdown. The resistant, durable nature of blood vessels help account for their survival in dinosaur remains. And then he continues to go on blood vessels in a similar way to what we just mentioned. So let's move on.
Many dinosaur bones are even found unfossilized in places like Madagascar, Alaska, and Montana. Does this evidence seem to support the Bible's recent and violent flood, or evolution stories? But some would say if the Bible includes the truth about Earth history, it would specifically mention dinosaurs. Well, the term dinosaur wasn't even invented until 1841.
I'm gonna need a source on that previous claim that unfossilized dinosaur bones were found. Fossilized dinosaur bones, Madagascar. Let's see what we got here. Where's our unfossilized bones? Do we have anything about the unfossilized bones? I'm not seeing it. Untreated or unfossilized bones. This is talking about emus and ostriches. Please get, oh, this is Schweitzer. Okay, yeah, so this is her emu, and I remember this paper. Please, okay, wait, university reported identifiable DNA from an unfossilized, it's creationmoments.com. Okay, well, maybe they'll give us, the actual source. Show me the unfossilized bone, creationmoments.com. Where is it? You know what, we'll just, oh no, a living trilobite. Oh, I already don't trust it at all. Oh no, isopods aren't trilobites, not even close. Okay, what were we looking up? Unfos, okay, here we go. According to Brian Sykes, writing in Nature, the rate at which, okay, yeah, I trust Brian Sykes. He's done some work with Yeti DNA, if you'll permit him that. He showed it wasn't Yetis. Nevertheless, science from departments of microbiology, Brigham Young University, identifiable DNA from an unfossilized dinosaur bone discovered in a Utah coal mine. Where's our Madagascar one? Oh no, the paper's from 1994. Oh my god, and they're not touting it anymore. Oh, that means it was probably overturned. That sucks for them. Wow. But let's look it up anyways. Let's find out. Okay. Unfossilized dinosaur bone in a Utah coal mine. Maybe we can just... Wait, it just says Science 1994 and there's no bibliography. I don't know how we're supposed to find this. A small team of scientists located in Columbus, Ohio have secured an unfossilized hadrosaur head from North Alaska sent to a reputable Russian laboratory for carbon-14 dating. You can't date things that are older than 50,000 years. Oh God. Oh no. I've never heard this claim before, so I don't even know where to begin. I wonder if we can just Google Science 1994. Science 1994. Look, I can even spell science wrong. 1994. Utah unfossilized dinosaur bone. A scientist says he has isolated DNA. That's... It's not really good. Science Mag. I don't care what they say about me. Oh wait, that's Mary Schweitzer. Yeah, she's cool. Okay, so it looks like nothing has come from this. The scientist says he's isolated dinosaur DNA. Did he ever excuse me, choked on my own spit. Has he ever published about it? The DNA bore little to no resemblance of modern animals. Other scientists skeptical of the research want to see the research tested by independent laboratories, which I guess he wouldn't do. It is in a report in today's issue of Journal Science, Dr. Woodward said he isolated DNA molecules from pieces of two ancient bones that produced 9 readable sequences from standard DNA. It's the first report in an authoritative journal has published about an apparent success in isolating what is presumably dinosaur DNA. So surely, okay, let's see. On the basis of circumstantial physical and geological evidence, Dr. Woodward wrote, it is likely that the bone fragments belong to a Cretaceous period dinosaur or dinosaurs. He doesn't know what it's from, specifically. The fragments were too small to be identified definitively as dinosaurian? Oh my God! I don't think they can show that these are dinosaur bones from a paleontologist. Oh no! Oh no, they're probably not even dinosaur bones. Oh, the reason I say that is because, and we'll cover this at length in an upcoming radiocarbon video, but if you're finding DNA in dinosaur bones, you should find them ubiquitously in all dinosaur bones, right? Especially if they were buried under identical conditions, a global flood. There should be no dinosaur bone you don't find DNA from. So this does not bode well. The jury is still out until others can reproduce his results. Oh no, and we haven't heard from him since 1994. Okay, we're moving on.
And Bible translations before this time used the term dragon over 35 times, in many contexts describing dinosaur-like creatures. Job chapter 40 describes a majestic creature using the name Behemoth, which means colossal beast. In context, Job and his philosopher friends just finished over 30 chapters of dialogue trying to explain God and why he would allow such hardships into Job's life.
I just want to take a moment to note that I don't really care about the whole dinosaur dragon argument. I think it's dumb. I think if you really are trying to prove that dinosaurs are the dragons that we see in mythology, you're gonna just have to show that dinosaur remains are that young, right? And to do that, well, I mean, you've reached kind of a point where it's impossible to do that, right? Because it would be one thing if you were someone who was suggesting that like a small group of dinosaurs had persisted. When I'm saying dinosaur, I do mean non-avian dinosaur. And the dinosaur people will just have to live with that. But it's one thing to propose that like a group of dinosaurs persisted on their own, But the problem is creationists have lumped themselves into a box here because they suppose that all the dinosaurs that weren't on the ark died off in the same exact conditions, a global flood, and at the same exact time geologically, within 6 months. There is no reason why we should not have gobs of dinosaur DNA and radiocarbon. I mean, we should be able to dig whatever the hell we want out of these things if they're 4,400 years old, just like we can with pretty much any kind of remains that we find that are only that old. But that's not the case, right? And that's not even touching the whole, yes, many cultures have dragons in their mythology. The problem is all the dragons are different, and also a lot of cultures have trickster gods in their mythology, and that does not substantiate the existence of a trickster god. I messed up trickster twice there. Have pity on me.
Then God shows up in a whirlwind, tells Job to brace himself like a man, and says that he would be the one asking Job the questions for a while. Then, for 4 chapters straight...
This is what happens when you don't steal your assets, Genesis Apologetics. Normally they're keen on cribbing their assets from like other places, like they steal a lot of stuff from National Geographic. This is what happens when they do it themselves. I have to say I prefer it when they steal.
God asked Job 77 rhetorical questions that all have to do with creation. After explaining to Job that he is the master designer of space and earth, God describes 13 of his created animals, such as an ostrich, horse, and deer, then caps off the discussion by telling Job about his 2 grandest creations, Behemoth and Leviathan.
Poor Leviathan. Leviathan is just dwarfed by the golden behemoth here. I think that's because Leviathan breathes fire and they can't cram that into a dinosaur, unless you're doing Gish.
God calls Behemoth the first of all his ways, meaning the first in rank, the chief, the most supreme of his creative works. In context, God is saying to Job, sit down, brace yourself, and now I will tell you of the chief of all my works, the biggest, most amazing land creature I ever made. When we scan through all land-dwelling creatures...
Now, I'm not 100% sure why biggest is being inferred here. If memory serves, biggest is not exactly the wording. But let's, you know what, we ought to pull up Job 40. And let's pull it up in the Hebrew. We'll do ourselves a favor. Oh God, okay, this was good enough. All right, and I know it's near the end. Here we go. Okay. Behold now the behemoth, which I have made with thee. He eateth grass as an ox. Lo now, his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the stays of his body. So he's not the biggest, but he is big. He straineth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are as pipes of brass. His gristles are like bars of iron. He is the beginning of the ways of God. He only made him can make his sword approach unto him. Surely the mountains bring forth food, and all the beasts of the field play there. He lieth under the lotus trees, in the covert of the reed and fens. The lotus trees cover them with his shadow, and the willows of the brook compass him about. Behold, if a river overflow, he trembleth not. He is confident, though the Jordan rush forth to his mouth. Shall any take him by his eyes, or pierce his nose with a snare? Canst thou draw out Leviathan with the fish hook? Okay, we're not really talking about Leviathan now. Or I guess they're talking about Leviathan, but we're not, so we're going to go back. So now that we have in mind what actually was said, and we're going to talk about, I already know, I haven't seen this video. They're going to get upset about this part in particular. He straineth his tail like a cedar. Now sometimes this is interpreted as moves his tail like a cedar, but never his tail is a cedar, right? It's always about the straining, the movement of the tail, which is very interesting because the argument that they're going to make is that it couldn't be a hippopotamus and it couldn't be an elephant because, of course, they've got these little itty bitty tails in comparison to the sauropods. Sauropods, as Dan Biddle's guy here would say. So therefore, it simply must be some kind of sauropod, right? Because sauropods have big tails. That's what he's going to argue. My argument is very different. I don't think that the behemoth is any living animal. I don't think the Leviathan or the behemoth are any living animal. And the reason is because these two organisms repeatedly pop up in the Bible, especially in extended Hebrew canon and earlier copies of the text, as these primordial creatures of earth and sea. And there actually used to be a third one called Ziz, who was the one of the sky. But we'll get there. We will get there.
Both living and extinct. Which one comes up as the first in rank? The most colossal or the chief? Clearly the Sauropod Dinosaur. Pairing God's word that Behemoth is the grandest creature he ever made with the fact that sauropods are the largest land creatures we've ever found should give us a clue to Behemoth's identity. Sauropods were huge.
So that's just a ridiculous argument, and we can leave it at that.
The largest one found to date was over 120 feet long. That's 10 freeway lanes across.
At least we are
Have
quoting
you
from
ever
Nat Geo
wondered
again.
what would happen if you actually sat down and talked with missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Well, the answer depends on you. What do you want to talk
My
about?
name is Elder Price.
At a weight of 76 tons, it's a wonder these creatures could even walk. In fact, Dr. Waddell was granted an international award for discovering one of the secrets behind how their mobility was even possible. Their bones were pneumatic. They were charged with air. Dr. Waddell notes they were marvels of biological engineering, and that efficiency of design is especially evident in their vertebrae.
I mean, I respect the hustle of, like, reusing clips, but this is a little extreme.
The bones that make up the backbone. It turns out their vertebrae was increasingly lighter, higher up the spinal column, and were filled with air, some up to 90%.
When Matt puts sauropod backbones through a CT scanner, he finds a real surprise. The X-ray slices from the CT scans revealed not marrow, but a honeycomb pattern inside the dinosaur's back and neck
That
bones,
is pretty cool.
filled only with air. Matt's work shows that the bigger dinosaurs got, the more air they had in their vertebrae.
This is one neck vertebra from Supersaurus.
A neck bone like this would have been light enough for one man to lift. The same size mammal bone would require a forklift.
Now, we found that the biggest of these sauropods.
He's just cribbing cool stuff from Nat Geo. Business as usual. That is very neat, though. Before this video, I can never again say I've never learned anything from a Genesis Apologetics video, because I actually did not know that they had that many pockets in the vertebra of their neck. But it does make sense. These were really big critters. But again, this is just wow, the animal's adapted to its environment. Must be intelligent design. No. Otherwise we wouldn't see organisms evolving today to different environments. Which we do. And it takes no interaction with humans to do so.
Sauropods, the vertebrae were about 90% air. So that's comparable to styrofoam.
So the bigger the dinosaurs got, the more air sac-like structures running into the bone.
Absolutely.
While this may solve the puzzle of how they could lift and move their massive heads and necks, it doesn't solve the challenge of how they could possibly inhale enough oxygen through their tiny nostrils, which were only about twice the size of those on a living horse.
Now we're stealing from BBC.
Perhaps they thrived better in a world before Noah's flood when the
Okay. I mean, while we're making stuff up, you know?
oxygen levels were likely higher. Their long necks and tails resembled living suspension bridges. For this creature to eat, breathe, and move its long neck, the series of over 12 neck vertebrae had to be interlocking and twistable. They also had to have anchoring points in just the right places for muscles and ligaments to connect in such a way to prevent the neck from pinching veins and nerves and to brace the trachea and esophagus. God even describes Behemoth's diet, eating grass like an ox. In 2005, researchers found grass and sauropod coprolites in India, and some paleobotanists are even saying that this will cause a rewrite in our understanding of dinosaur evolution.
So, I know this paper. And this paper was pretty cool. Essentially what it did is it found phytoliths, I think it was. Phytoliths? Yeah, I think it was phytoliths. that were only trackable to grasses in these, what were, in fact, I think they were titanosaurs, coprolites from India. It was really cool. It was really big news. Back in 2005, like, I don't know what this guy expects here. I don't know what Biddle and Genesis Apologetics expect. Science changes when we find new evidence, when new evidence comes to light. Prior to this paper, it was thought that grasses didn't definitively evolve until 55 million years ago, 10 million years after the dinosaurs. But what this paper showed is that some kinds of very basal grasses were showing up as early as the end Cretaceous. It's not like we were finding grasses in the Triassic, okay? This was an adjustment, to be sure, with the kind of earliest grasses that we find, but it also wasn't like super derived grasses like the kind that we have today that were found. But I'm sure he's going to make a big deal out of this discovery that happened 16 years ago.
Because evolution holds that grass didn't evolve until millions of years after the dinosaurs had gone extinct. God describes Behemoth's strength in his hips and power in his stomach muscles. Again, we have a strong clue that Behemoth was a sauropod dinosaur.
So, let's play the conventional game, right? Like, let's assume that what the Hebrews were talking about actually was a hippopotamus, okay? I don't think it was a hippopotamus, but let's just say that it is. So far, eats grass, that checks out. Green plants, that checks out for hippopotamus. How about strength in the hips and muscles, power in the stomach muscles? Yeah, that checks out too. Hippos are pretty big and pretty powerful. Other than mosquitoes, they're the animal every year that causes like the most deaths in humans, other than humans and mosquitoes, I guess. Yeah.
Because while many animals have strong hips and stomach muscles, none were as strong as the sauropod.
But it didn't say that it had the strongest hip muscles. It said that it had strong hip muscles.
The muscle structure around the hips and stomach that were necessary for sauropods to move, walk, turn, and eat would be incredible. In fact, for some sauropods, like the Diplodocus, its highest point of its core body was the hips, and its whole body balanced on the hips, front to back.
None of this matters. That's not what the verse says. Like the verse over here, it says, let's see, behold the behemoth, he eateth grass like an ox. Lo now, the strength in his loins, and his force is in the stays of his body. He's big and strong. That's what the verse says. It doesn't say that he is the strongest. It says that he is strong, right? Behold now the behemoth, which I have made with thee. I think he talks about how the behemoth at one point is like one of God's finest creations or something along those lines. He is the beginning of the ways of God. He only that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. So he's big and he's a big boy. He's a big absolute unit. That's all the verses are saying. Not that he's the biggest unit. so like I don't like. Golly, I mean this is so classic creationist though. They take something that is simple, and then they have to do all of these really weird mental gymnastics in order to like force fit modern science into this biblical lens, right? And then they turn around and they accuse, like, for instance, theistic evolutionists of doing that with the scripture, despite the fact that the theistic evolutionists are interpreting the Bible through the lens of the ancient Near East, through the lens of the culture at hand. When creationists are talking about a plain reading, they mean a plain reading in English. When theistic evolutionists are talking about a plain reading, or, biblical scholars are talking about a plain reading, they're talking about what the culture understood it to be in its plainest sense, right? And like I said, we're going to get to this in a minute, but the culture at the time, as far as I can understand, did not think Behemoth was an actual creature, right? Or if they did, it was some kind of primordial organism, similar to the Leviathan being this chaos monster. I mean, that's going to be in a moment, I'm sure. Let's continue.
Diplodocus was able to rear up on its back legs and balance on its tail like a tripod, making use of the hips to support not just the back half of its body, but the front half too. This required enormous strength in the hip and stomach muscles, considering they lifted tons of its own body into the air. Below the hips was an incredible weight distribution system that went from a massive femur which in some cases was about 8 feet long, to 2 shin bones, then to 5 toes. Behemoth's tail also closely matches those of sauropods. God describes that he moves his tail like a cedar tree, and follows this by stating the sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. Paleontologists have learned from muscle attachment locations in their bones that the tightly knit structure of Behemoth's thighs and hips actually made his tail sway from side to side with each step, much as a cedar tree does when it sways in the wind.
Like, get into the headspace here. Imagine taking modern paleontologic truths and trying to apply them to an ancient Near Eastern understanding of the chaos deity of the desert, which is what Behemoth is. Again, we're going to get to that in a second.
Tail drag marks are only rarely found behind sauropod footprints, indicating their tails were raised while they walked. It's difficult to think of a creature that fits this biblical description better than a sauropod dinosaur. God describes his bones like beams of bronze.
Before we move on to, let's remember we're using our hippopotamus as a stand-in. And hippos, when they poop, right, their tail moves like this, right? It shakes rapidly, kind of like a tree does when it's being gusted by the wind. So if we really want to talk about moves like a cedar trees don't move like this, right? They don't move back and forth. They're rustled briskly. So I mean, even by their own logic, it doesn't work.
Most Bible versions translate this phrase as tubes of bronze, conduits of bronze, or pipes of brass, which conveys both strength and being hollow like a channel or a tube.
All bones are hollow to a degree. The marrow and the spongy bone is in the center. Hippo, femur. Here we go. Yeah, so a hippopotamus femur is also quite tube-like. Like all bones are. I don't... This headspace is just so strange to me.
This matches the fact that sauropods had the largest leg bones of any animal, and they...
Again, biggest doesn't matter. That's not what the verse even says.
Are in fact just like tubes of metal, having a hard outer casing and spongy marrow and veins on the inside. Then God says that its ribs are like bars of iron. Unlike much of sauropod's skeleton that was spongy and filled with air for weight savings, its ribs were fully ossified. They were made out of solid bone. Again, we have a perfect match. God even describes Behemoth's habitat. He lies under the lotus trees, in a covert of reeds and marsh. The lotus trees cover him with their shade, and the willows by the brook surround him. This was a creature that had to be near lots of green food, living in a lush, tropical environment. Large sauropods had to eat half a ton of vegetation every day, and they likely had to eat all day long to consume this amount of food. Next, God says that indeed the river may rage, yet he is not disturbed. He is confident, though the Jordan gushes into his mouth.
Though the Jordan gushes into his mouth. Boy, kind of reminds me of a hippo. Again.
Why would God point out that this animal can stand in a rushing river? Lots of animals can do this, depending on the size of the rushing river. In this case, God said the river may rage, yet he is not disturbed, in that Behemoth is confident even though this raging river should gush into his mouth. The Jordan River is the largest river in Palestine, and it currently flows at only 15% of the rate it flowed in the past. Even so, in the winter, this river would be incredibly difficult to cross, and it would take a very sizable animal to stand undisturbed in this rushing current, and even more, let the current gush into its mouth. Some of the larger sauropods stood over 20 feet at the shoulders and weighed over 70 tons. Creatures of this size and mass could withstand a raging river better than any others. Even with all this evidence, some say that Behemoth was just a mythical creature.
That's what I say, and we're going to get to it. But first, hippos strengthen the hip and stomach muscles, strong stomach muscles. Moves his tail like a cedar. I want to show you what I mean here. Hippo, tail, pooping. Let's see what we got here. Show me the money. Maybe this one's literally called the poop sprayer. Is it going to show us or not? Oh, it's on YouTube. Well, that's okay. We're gonna mute that so we don't get copyright claimed. I understand the irony in that. Alright, sway like a cedar, my son. Right now? It's starting. Oh, what a gust. What a horrific windstorm we're experiencing. Okay, so, yeah, moves like a cedar. Check. Sinews of thighs are tightly knit? Check. Bones like beams of bronze? Check. Ribs like bars of iron? Check. First in the rank of all God's creations? I mean, I like hippos. I think God would like hippos. I don't understand necessarily why first in rank means biggest to the creationists, but that's fine, I guess. Not disturbed in a raging river? Check. Now, let's hear what they have to say about this mythical creature claim before we get into it.
But why would God try to display his awesome creative power by describing something that never existed?
Whose DeviantArt account did they steal that from?
Anyone can do that.
We fight the battles no one hears about.
Oh my God.
We're the ones who go before all others.
Get out.
And why would God say that Behemoth was the chief of all his creations after describing 13 real, still living animals in the same passage?
So, let's talk a little bit about this. So after talking about the Behemoth, right, God starts talking about the Leviathan. Let's listen to the Leviathan. Behold at the okay, that's okay. Shall any take him by the eyes or pierce him through the nose with a snare? Canst thou draw the Leviathan out with a fish hook, or press down his tongue with a cord? Canst thou put a ring into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a hook? Will he make many supplications unto thee, or will he speak soft words unto thee? Will he make a covenant with thee, that thou shouldest take him for a servant forever? Wilt thou play with him as with a bird, or wilt thou bind him for thy maidens? Will the bands of fishermen make a banquet of him? Will they part him among the merchants? Canst thou fill his skin with barbed irons, or his head with fish spears? Lay thy hand upon him, think upon the battle. Thou wilt do no more. Will do so no more. Next page. Behold, the hope of him is in vain. Shall not one be cast down even at the sight of him? None is so fierce that dares stir him up. Who then is able to stand before me? Who hath given me anything beforehand that I should repay him? Whosoever is under the whole heaven is mine. Why would I keep silence concerning his boastings, or his proud talk, or his fair array of words? Who can uncover the face of his garment? Who shall come within his double bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? Round about his teeth is terror. His scales are his pride, shut up together with a close seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined to one to another. They stick together and they cannot be sundered. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning torches, and the sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils goeth smoke, as out of a seething pot, and burning rushes. His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth out of his mouth. In his neck abideth strength, and dismay danceth before him. The flakes of his flesh are joined together, they are firm upon him, and they cannot be moved. His heart is firm as stone, yea, firm as the nether millstone. That's pretty metal. When he raiseth himself up, the mighty are afraid. By reason of despair they are beside themselves. If one lay him with the sword, it will not hold, not the spear, not the dart, nor the pointed shaft. His esteemeth iron as straw, and brass as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee, slingstones are turned with him into stubble. Clubs are counted as stubble, and he laugheth at the rattling of the javelin. Sharpest potsherds are under him, he spreadeth a thrashing sledge upon the mire. He maketh the deep to boil like a pot, he maketh the sea like a seething mixture. He maketh the path to shine after him, one would think the deep to be hooray, or hoary. Upon earth there is not his like, who is made to be fearless. He looketh at all high things, he is king over all the proud beasts. So, this is a fire-breathing monster. What dinosaur is that? Is my question. The answer, of course, is none of the dinosaurs. And that's why Behemoth also, Behemoth proper name, Leviathan proper name, if I'm remembering correctly, that's what makes them different from all of the other animals, and that's what makes them these primordial chaos monsters. In fact, the Leviathan is referred to elsewhere in the Old Testament, and it gets a proper name of Rahab. God wrestles with Rahab on the foundations of the earth. Let me find you Ziz. Behemoth, Leviathan, Ziz. Okay, here we go. This is the Wikipedia, but it'll show the picture. Yeah, Ziz used to be included, this cool griffin-looking dude, but Behemoth is here, Leviathan is here. This is ancient 14th century art, something along those lines, in Jewish mythology. But allegedly, it used to be a part of the canon as well, allegedly. So what we're looking at here, and we'll consult the Wikipedia for Behemoth as well, because it's got some nice sources if memory serves. So it's always been interpreted by the Jewish people as a primordial chaos monster, the unconquerable male land monster living in an invisible desert east of the Garden of Eden. And the Leviathan is the primeval female sea monster dwelling in the abyss, Ziz being the primordial sky monster. So, and this was known by the Jewish people. You have to understand it, again, through the culture, not just through an English reading. He talks about it here for a little bit. The passage pairs the Behemoth with the sea monster Leviathan, both composite mythical creatures with enormous strength, which humans like Job could not hope to control, yet both are reduced to the status of divine pets. That's cool. Coogan 2004, I believe that's just a biblical scholar. What I'm saying is biblical scholars understand them to be primordial chaos monsters. The ancient Hebrews understood them to be primordial chaos monsters, not animals where there were multiple, but there was a behemoth, there was a leviathan. There weren't behemoths and leviathans, that's why it's a name. It's talking about a singular. So we could continue to talk about this. I consult the Wikipedia for this because I am not a theologian or anything like that. In fact, I don't think it was until the creationists came along that people thought that look, they don't even include the creationists in the modern interpretations that tend to fall into three categories. He's an animal of the natural world, most often the hippopotamus, although the elephant, crocodile, and water buffalo have been suggested, an invention of the poet who wrote the Book of Job, or a mythical chaos beast like Leviathan, but not identified with him. In the Haggadah, the behemoth's strength reaches its peak on the summer solstice because it's a heat, sun, desert deity. Two gigantic monsters paired at the end after talking about all the real legitimate creatures. This is what the scholars think. This is what the Hebrews thought. This is what it was understood to be. And interestingly enough, this is reflected in other ancient Near Eastern texts of other cultures at the time. So the behemoth, it's not a dinosaur. I don't know. Again, it was the creationists that came up with this. So, oh God, we've got so much more to get through. Holy moly. Okay, I think this is mostly just going to be more soft tissue stuff. Hold on just a minute. So we skimmed the rest of this video, and it's mostly just a massive cribbed and really dishonestly edited Mary Schweitzer interview. She's the one who found the original soft tissue in dinosaurs. She is a theistic evolutionist, by the way. And then some of these classics, allegedly dinosaur cave art and things of that nature. This first one here, over on our upper left, is interesting because the folks who actually did work on this actually found out it's a bunch of different images layered on top of each other. This section is, for instance, an image, and then this section is, for instance, an image. And this enhanced version makes that very difficult to see. But if you look at the original over here, you can see it's very faded, and there are a bunch of other drawings coming in and interacting with this from up here and down here. Of course, again, enhanced image, dishonest, make sure that you don't see those. But you can look into this, it's quite an easy one to track down. All of the rest of these, except for this one, are Sauropods, which are a part of Egyptian mythos, right? Sauropods are a mixture of a leopard and a serpent. And the way that you can tell is because of the long neck and also because of the ears. These are feline ears on a lot of these, and also a long curved cat-like tail. Or in the case of this bottom left one, another head that is also a cat. This middle one, to me, this just looks like an ambiguous reptile of some sort. It's not specifically a sauropod, you can tell by the sprawling stance of the hands. And then at the end of the video, of course, we get some nice shilling for Genesis Apologetics. They ask you to go ahead and... this video is produced by Genesis Apologetics, designed for non-profit educational purposes only. It contains copyrighted material. They're claiming fair use. Of course they are. Of course, that's what I'm doing. So I guess I can't, stones and glass houses. Again, notice they don't talk about the Leviathan. They used to. They used to call it a mosasaur, but it was really difficult for them to get around that fire breathing. And there's some really excellent works out there kind of on it. This was a classic one. This video that they show right here, this guy mentions how he talks to the secular archaeologist that brought them there, and how he was like, oh, I don't know what this critter depicted in the scene is, but, and then off camera, he according to this guy, he's like, off camera, he told me he thought it was a dinosaur that had lived to recent times. Okay. How convenient. Again, this is from a series of Ice Age paintings, actually. They found a lot of really strange animals, mythological creatures, and also some that are actually able to be tied to known Ice Age animals, like the giant ground sloth, which is really interesting. Again, this is the giant piece of cribbed of stuff that, not this, just this section, like right here. Cribbed from a Mary Schweitzer interview, very dishonestly edited. He also talks at some point here, I want to make sure I cover it, of all the different stuff that they've found, soft tissue-wise. It's all covered in dinosaur blood in the Age of the Earth, which I recommend that you get, which is great. The bottom line is, this is a disappointing video. There's really not much to it. It is patently dishonest at some parts, and at others it is just incorrect and uninformed. So, take that as you will. And with that, we have finished the 7 myths. We did skip did Moses write the Old Testament, or the Pentateuch? I don't really care about that. I don't care if he did or he didn't. But conventional scholarship said he didn't, so take that as you will. And we're going to go ahead and end it here, I think. Thank you so much for being here, my gentle and, of course, very modern apes. And Genesis Apologetics has a lot to offer my channel as far as dunking goes.
Welcome
so
to
if you like this kind of content, where we just slam dunk all over Genesis Apologetics, please let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and ring the bell. You can join my Patreon if you'd like. They get early access to videos like this one. The patrons are probably seeing this early. Hello, patrons! Thank you for being supporters. And I hope that all of you out there, take excellent care of yourselves and have an excellent rest of your day.